So this is using query for January 25th, or first of 20, no, second of 2020. Yeah, first, whatever. Anyway, we build this call as giving an update to the user community about automation, shorthand being data sets that update themselves, or the ability to run updates with what we're calling Qrimatic for now as a placeholder. This is how products get named. So, but right now the placeholder name is called Qrimatic. We gave a little bit of an update, I think, last time we demoed, but I don't know specifically if B5, you want to talk a little bit about what you're hoping to cover.
Absolutely. I've got a very, very small deck present, and then we can go into question Q&A if that's possible, but I think I should be able to have like a nice quick 5-minute overview of what we mean by Qrimatic, and then we can go from there. If that sounds good.
Sure. And I would just say that for Horace's benefit, I think he's been following Query as a project for a little while now, has not used it. So, please, Horace, stop us if we're ever using acronyms or words or stuff that don't help you kind of understand what we're building here.
Happy to be interrupted. This is a very casual conversation. Cool. All right, I'm going to share a screen really quick. And then, yeah, we'll do the quick 10,000 feet. And hopefully also have a discussion for query folks. Feel free to, I mean, you should be briefed on this stuff, but questions at the end for the approach absolutely are welcome. So today we're going to talk about Qrimatic. Again, as Rico said, I don't think it'll be called Qrimatic when we finally put it out and like get it to some people with, I don't know, marketing skills or have a marketing meeting internally. But for now, we're calling it Qrimatic, which is basically the lineage of the term was just, hey, it's query plus automatic stuff and automation, so therefore it's going to be called Qrimatic. And so just quickly getting into like what it actually is, basically Qrimatic is a scheduler that we're writing on top of query. And so query at its core is a way for building a catalog of version controlled data sets. It includes inside of it techniques for writing automations, but the piece that's really been missing from query and that we've tried in the past putting into the query binary, but now we're going to move it outside into its own thing, is the sort of just scheduling and orchestration side of things. When do you run data set updates? What happens when those updates are actually executed? And then how do you sort of like make sure that you have some place where you can see from a high level what's going on inside of that entire system and sort of a system for monitoring that. And so on top of that, it's also a very smart place for us to build a robust transform script editor, which is something that we also feel like we've been missing in the past. Transform scripts are the thing that you automate. It's a specific dialect of Starlark that we can talk about in a second. But what Qrimatic is going to include is basically a web browser accessible thing that we'll host the first versions on a public facing site that allow you to go to a website, write a transform script, schedule that transform scripts, and monitor it from the internet without a special tool native. We think that we spent a whole bunch of time building Query Desktop, which is a great way to sort of do sync and local maintenance of dataset versions. This is specifically a place where you can just sort of do this all from the web. And we think that's another thing that we're going to include in Qrimatic. And so specifically, who is this for? Generally, this is for people who do data engineering work. So people who, the classic conversation that sort of should make folks think of query and Qrimatic as a combo is like you have a data set that you're constantly needing to update to keep fresh, and people who are downstream of you depending on that data set. Whenever you have those two things sort of in common, this is where Qrimatic is really going to shine. And it might be you yourself who just want up-to-date data and you don't want to have to deal with the updates. But this Qrimatic will let you write a script, attach that script to a data set, schedule that data set, have it be running, and then be able to have those notifications go out to the people that need it. So now you can have people just get emails when the latest data shows up instead of having to constantly rerun queries or run a script again and output a format, email a person. We're trying to cut away a lot of that sort of human-to-human interaction of disseminating useful data sets. So the high-level features that were sort of like, and the workflows generally, I probably should have titled this slide workflows. Basically, you're going to write these repeatable automations, you're going to bound them to a version controlled data set. You're going to then configure when to run them with stuff like cron jobs and webhooks and then whatever integrations are necessary to sort of like get the data set to fire at the right time. And then we'll provide a dashboard again on the web. And on top of all that, you'll get the usual classic query experience of versioning, sharing, and synchronization across a number of nodes. While we're here, we should also talk about what query is, or Qrimatic, the project is not going to become. It's not going to be a tool for exploratory data analysis. We're not expecting users to use Qrimatic to visualize stuff, to explore what data is. The general theory is to use an integration instead. And so if you're a Jupyter Notebook user or an RStudio user, our theory is that you'll create these data sets, publish them, and then import them to your existing tools for exploratory data analysis. If you're going to visualize something, you're going to create a project out of it. Qrimatic is much more for, okay, you know what you want to do. It's a thing that you need to automate and make discrete, and you need to run it a lot. And that may be because you don't really have control over the source material, so you don't know when that data is going to change, or you don't know, or you just want to not have to touch it. You want it just to run every hour, every day, and not have to worry about it. And so the last thing is Qrimatic, the tool, is built on top of our existing transform syntax, which is written in a dialog called Starlark. Starlark is supposed to be basically Python syntax, but with a much higher degree of control for the execution environment. And so this is really part of our sort of main theory of the approach is that we're not actually using containers for a lot of this. And the reason for that is to make this really efficient to run a lot. Qrimatic is going to be ideally a very efficient system that over time we can get more and more and more insight out of these transform scripts. So we can really do a lot of data flow analysis and static analysis of the transform script itself to understand what is going on and be really smart about when to run this code and really efficient about it. So lots of other solutions in the past would just throw containers at this problem, something like a Docker container. The problem with Docker containers or any containerized solution is you're now spinning up an entire operating system, running an entire pipeline. You have to keep all of those containers around and have all of that sort of overhead to effectively run what is a glorified bash script to make sure that everything is going to pull together properly. What's really missing is what we think that Starlark really brings us is this really an opportunity to write an API that feels a lot like classic Python EDA tools like Pandas and the Jupyter Notebook experience. And so we're actually going to mimic that as closely as possible. So the feeling of writing a transform script should feel really close to the classic Jupyter Notebooks. I'm going to import Pandas. I'm going to use data frames. I'm going to run data frame transformations. And at the end of it, I will save a version data set. But the hope is that we can reduce the overhead required to actually execute that script a lot, and will allow us to have this Qrimatic thing schedule many, many, many different data sets to be able to say, cool, I have easily sort of hundreds of data sets being scheduled and maintained and run all the time, and keep the computational overhead of that low, keep the sort of compute bill of that lower, and sort of really focus on just the data deliverable and getting that into the right place. So that's the kind of like high and low of it. I think we're targeting right now April 2021 for a beta test, opening this up to the general public to use it. We have lots of wires internally that because we're on a public call, we should totally fire up some of those wireframes and walk through them if others are interested. But I think that's sort of the high level that I wanted to talk through of like what we're thinking for this Qrimatic tool and how we want it to like sort of situate itself in our ecosystem. This is all based on looking at a year of building data sets on query.cloud and with query over time. And we really sort of one of the biggest pain points that people had using query in the past was keeping data up to date, actually making that data set stay fresh and running and using all of that data and keeping a fresh data catalog. And so we're trying to sort of really listen to that and make a purpose-built tool that makes it much easier for the people who are sort of strapped with this burden of like keeping data synced with people or up to date, giving them tools to really make this a clean and easy experience. I think that's the 10,000 feet of it. I'm sure we've missed a million things and there may be some questions from others, but I'm happy to take any questions. Does that generate? Horace, do you feel like you need a better explanation of what we've been doing with query to begin with to like sort of situate things? Did we go?
Well, I mean, I think I have a loose idea. I mean, I don't want to like derail. Like the questions I would have are like super, like having never even used it. It's like the questions are so kind of basic that I don't know that it's worth like derailing the whole conversation or whatever. But,
Oh, it's absolutely worth it. Please, please. This is an in the weeds call. That's the whole point.
well, so I mean, I guess one thing that maybe is pretty basic about query that like I said, I haven't actually tried it, but is it kind of like explicitly targeted at like data sets that fit into like a plausible local amount of memory? Like, does that question make sense? Because you're talking about things
Absolutely.
like load into a data frame and do a blah, blah, blah. And it's like, so this kind of, it sounds like it kind of assumes like that type of use case or.
Yeah, so we think of it as human scale data, basically anything that fits on a laptop. That's very much the sweet spot for query. Query is not a big data tool. It becomes a big data tool with lots and lots of data sets, right? The idea is to manage thousands of smaller data sets, not individual large data sets. And so a lot of folks interface query with larger tools. And so you have your snowflakes, your dbts, like your big stuff for managing the stuff. And then at some point you have this seam where your beautiful data pipeline then needs to be turned into something that mere mortals can work with. And that's where we get a lot of where query can really come into play, where you can actually version the output of that and use that for sort of more succinct communication around, hey, what do you have the latest? Do I have the latest? What is the latest? And what is that? And so query sweet spot is in the gig range, not in the TB or the petabyte range, if that makes sense.
I mean, even a gig is bigger than what I would have maybe guessed. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm thinking about comparable to what you would put in like a Google Sheet or something. And
totally,
the idea of like a gigabyte Google Sheet seems like it could become unwieldy, maybe. But I don't know.
Super painful. Yeah, and so for us, we do we sort of really sit above. You can totally do a 100-row data set inquiry, and lots of people do. But we comfortably scale from like spreadsheets up to tens of gigs. It would be the sort of range I would describe us working in. To give you some like real benchmarks, my machine to create a version of a 13 gigabyte data set takes around 20 minutes. And a lot of that time is the hashing, but that's the creation of it. Reading it, super quick, no problem.
Doesn't it then have to get like uploaded? Like, isn't there some centralized like store of stuff, or is it all like just lives on your laptop or whatever?
So it is a decentralized tool. So think of it much like Git, where once you've created that version, that is the canonical version. You can push it somewhere and then it becomes a backup, but it is actually under the hood a immutable thing once you've created a version of it. So you have that immutable thing locally. We have pushing just like Git does. And so you can push to remote registries or remotes that hang on to that data for you, which you often have to do if you want to coordinate with somebody, right? But the canonical
some
version.
People are using it purely locally. Like it's just like, they don't even push anywhere. They only use it locally on their thing. I see.
100%. Yeah.
Because I mean, I feel like at that point, like it doesn't matter how fast you can hash stuff because you have crappy home internet upload speed. So like your 10 gig thing is going to be miserable anyway,
Yeah. The hashing actually helps even in that part because what query does is it takes your data set and breaks it into blocks.
I see.
And there is a moment when you go to send something somewhere and it sends a list of all the blocks that it wants to send. And it says, oh, I already have these 700, don't send them to me. And so it cuts down on the over the wire sync process. And so you get a little bit of an advantage even in doing this sort of like Merkleized hash tree as well.
Like as long as you have, especially if your diff is small, then it's good, right?
Yes, exactly. So small append only log data sets, you get a really nice sort of like couple blocks type thing.
Or if you're like working with a popular data set that already exists in the network, like it's easy to identify that it's a duplicate.
Totally. That's the other bit, because it's immutable. You can pull data sets from anywhere if you have the hash and say you don't have wide internet access and you're in an office with somebody. Back when we all used to go to offices, you would move really quickly between the two because it could just come from your peer's machine.
I see. That's cool. Well, yeah, this is. I mean, like I said, this is like super basic.
Totally.
New, having never actually like done anything, question. So I should read up on this some more and stuff. But it's cool.
No, it's delightful to answer these questions because we're very happy to answer this because this is work that we've done in the past. And we're sort of, but.
So then, like your automation thing, do you like, what's y'all's kind of business model around that? Like, are you gonna just have people pay you for the compute, or it's like free up to some level, or what happens there?
Exactly. And so we'll offer a public service version of this where free set of credits, whatever, per month. We haven't quite figured it out, but then pay for
Yeah.
the really expensive compute. And that's part of the reason why we're really trying to use this sort of Starlark syntax to drive down the cost of the compute in the first place and just pass those savings off to users. Because we really want people to schedule data sets like, you have this classic, like, I have a data source I don't control. I want to check every hour if it's changing, and I want a new version created if it does.
Right.
We need to make that as efficient as possible for everybody involved.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm curious, is that something that people are doing a lot now via kind of like their own, scripting or whatever? Or is it just like, it's too much trouble and people don't even bother?
I think it's kind of a split. We get some folks who are smashing together scripts. Chris has been definitely handling a lot of this. He's in the camp of willing to do the work. But then we have a whole bunch of people who just don't bother.
I mean, this is like sort of classic. This is just classic problem, right? Like I can write a script. I can write a script in Python. I can write a script in Node that will download a CSV and, trim the first 100 lines off of it, do a bunch of like simple things. And I can run that from my terminal fine. But the instant I need to do it every Monday morning, then I have a problem. And you go online and you look and it's just, set up a cron job. Well, yeah, I can learn how to do a cron job, but now I need a server to run it on. Now I need to maintain that server and keep it up to date. And I think it just kind of compounds. And sure, like engineers can do this stuff and set it up in a very elegant way and make it so it's trustworthy and trusted. And I think we're shooting for the spot that is right below that, where it's a use case I've come across many, many times where it's just like, yes, I know how to set up a cron job. I know how to I know how to SSH into a server and watch this thing. Setting up an email notification for it is really hard these days because you have to do, all kinds of authentication trickery that you didn't have to do in the past. It's just like, I don't feel like it. I want to go somewhere that works more like Circle CI, where I can do some technical things, but I can kind of hand off the like more routine and probably more difficult to set up parts of it. And I can focus on just the actual like workflow that matters to me, which is transforming that data and saving it.
I like to think of it as how like Heroku, for example, allows you to really easily set up, a small server doing whatever you're doing. But with a lot of like data analysis stuff like this or data upkeep, you're going to have to add the same boilerplate every time you want to do that for each individual project. And just, there's a way to remove the repetition and just kind of collect it all into one place so that it becomes like the analog of Heroku for a web app, where it's just a data set running its update job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it's kind of, because I've always like worked at places where they have, their own infrastructure, but it kind of like coming to think about it, it's like why it makes you wonder if there is some kind of just like cron type type bash in a box cron as a service kind of thing like that. I guess I don't know that I've ever encountered anything like that. Is that, maybe that means there's no demand or what? I don't know.
Yeah, totally. It's a question of whether there's demand for this is something we will hopefully be reporting on in 6 months. But as far as we understand it, it's a pattern that we see a lot. And one of the biggest things we try to add to that is to make sure that the final output is something that has, if you could take the time to write a README, it's attached to it and in an obvious place and presented in a way that somebody can get at. And so we have a semi-opinionated data model that allows every data set inside of Query to be comparable, which means that data sets can import other data sets and makes the whole thing a little more composable than it would be otherwise. And that's sort of like part of the hope is to sort of get a bit of a fresh take on the data catalog thing. You'll see a lot where people will build up a catalog of stuff. It's like, okay, that's nice, but like half of these data sets will just be out of date and completely ignored and useless, in 10 minutes after that person stops hitting that update button. But more importantly, the data sets are not designed from the get-go to be composed. And so with Query, you can take any data set, run SQL against it, join it together. And more importantly, just like all the title fields are going to be in the same place. If a title field doesn't exist, you'll know, that kind of stuff. It's just like a very important baseline for making everything sort of accumulate to something more than the sum of its parts. So that part, we'll see how that sort of works out. That bit has been working quite nicely already for us on query.cloud, where folks just finally have something that ever has existed in software forever, where it's just like, oh, good, there's a README and it's in this spot and it's called readme.md. That's, yeah. Yeah. Query staff. How does that feel like we've described Qrimatic properly? Is there something I missed?
I don't think there's anything you missed. I like the, I don't know, bifurcation, maybe not the right word, but the thing of like, hey, this is what we are, and this is what we're not trying to do, so that you can, it's very, makes it easier, I think, for people to digest and like fully understand. Like, these are not the problems we're trying to solve. This is the problem we're trying to solve.
So I think this go around this year, we're trying to learn hard, not to be like, we get a lot of questions from users like, hey, can you put visualizations in this? And we've had much better productivity being like, use other tools to do your visualizations. We're not the right people for this. There are better things on the planet.
Yeah, we had some calls recently where I think having this clarity of purpose had benefit to like look at someone's data architecture map and point to a specific box where query fits in. So I think often we're like, yeah, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could fit here, we could solve that problem. But like, no, we want you to think of us as playing in this box where, you know, this happens before us, this happens after us. But like, you know, we're gonna focus on one thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'm gonna tell myself again. I'm gonna finally make some time at some point to try it out. You know, I just find something.
Well, Horace, now you're here now, and we have to try and pull your leg to get you to beta test this thing once it's up and running.
Yeah, I know. It's like I would love to, but I don't even have a thing to automate. You know, it's like I don't have a non-automated one to start with. But maybe, maybe that's where I would start. I guess.
I mean, a simple use case is just I don't know if you schedule if you keep any data in an Airtable or a Google Sheet, you know, like keeping a daily log of whatever a number of hours spent awake, something like that. So setting something up like that, then you could pipe that in a query with this tool. That would be that's what I'm planning to do with like my fish tank chemistry readings.
It doesn't need to be super complicated.
Yeah.
I think we often like jump to these use cases, and that's the other thing we'll do out of the gates is just like provide, you know, the classic templates for pulling a CSV, querying an API, hitting a database. That'll hopefully sort of spark some thought, because we definitely find a lot of that sort of blank canvas syndrome when you come to a new tool like this. It's like, oh, cool, what do I use this for? And like, you know, we're going to build out some templates that suggest use cases for that. Hopefully including fish tank monitoring as like a clear and salient example.
Yep.
Yeah, I would ask, Horst, what are your usual tools that you use?
Well, so I mean, I'm a software engineer. I work at Foursquare, the like location data company, and so I mean, to be clear, I'm not here in any kind of like official work.
Totally,
yeah. Or whatever. But I mean, we're like super mired in like the big data, you know, kind of thing. And so it's like everything is just Apache this and Hadoop that, and, you know, HBase, blah, blah, I mean, like all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of, I mean, so I think that's kind of a tricky thing for us. It's like a lot of this stuff. And like, in fact, we have some interesting tools internally that try to kind of like approach ways to manage those kind of things in a versioned change loggy type of way, you know, but just obviously the way you have to approach it gets kind of different, you know.
Very different, yeah.
But definitely, like, I mean, it's like thinking about this more, it's like I could imagine cases where for like, you know, everyone has their like random like internal admin tools that's like maintaining the smaller data set that's not the, you know, multi like terabyte whatever thing. And then like, you know, it's like, I was thinking, because the funny thing I feel like you see people often doing around like web apps is everyone's building in their own like audit logging kind of stuff where they're like, you know, they have a table of like widgets, and then they have another table where they're like widget versions, and they're like writing, you know, logs and all these things. And like, you know, I could imagine stuff like that maybe would be an interesting fit, you know.
Totally.
Us, but, and like, because I mean, I think one thing I would like to play around with is like I assume you'll have some nice way to see the diffs, like you can like look at the diffs in a grid or something like that or whatever.
Yeah, we call that a change report, and that'll be shipping with this tool as well. We specifically call it a change report because it's different from a diff. Like technically, a diff is like a script that translates dataset version A to dataset version B, which if it's, and we actually have experimented with building a differ that actually works across 10 gig data sets. And the output is quite incomprehensible. It's like, cool, 40 million rows have changed and in very subtle ways. And so what we've instead focused on is using statistical comparison, just to say, hey, this column's average has shifted by X, the number of rows added is Y, the number of rows removed is Z or Z, the number of null values has gone from this to that. And give you like a really high level understanding of what's changed between versions. And that's, we find that a little more readable than the end state, or than the sort of just classic diff, which we've also built some tools to like actually calculate. But an actual diff script of very large things, as you can imagine, gets very expensive to compute. And so when we sort of one day realized like, wait, so we're spending all this time to calculate this thing that is unreadable by humans. That
It's like no one's ever gonna actually look at this anyway. So what's the point? No, I feel that. I mean, I definitely have been in that boat. I mean, I think, I've definitely been in the realm of doing those kind of statistical change tracking and like all this stuff. I guess the thing that gets tricky is like at least in our usage, like it just things get very domain specific, and so it's like, I mean, I assume, just like you can't have this magical thing that automatically knows every sort of like domain specific thing, it's like if this particular gotcha, if this field changes in this way, then like you want to be alerted, or like all those kinds of like nitty gritties. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's so the closest thing we have there is we've embedded a full implementation of the JSON schema specification, which will generate validation errors if values stray outside of specific things. And you can actually flip a data set into something called strict mode, which will say like, please don't create new versions if the data set strays out of this. It's not exactly what you're asking, but basically you are able to do is say, define mins and maxes, define, values that should exist. We haven't really ventured yet into that exact thing that you said as where validation actually becomes domain specific. And the way we're thinking about that is instead of using a change report of any kind, but actually including in the transform step, this transform scripts chances to generate output that will help you understand that report or understand those shifts over time. Because as you said, you basically just need to write code that says, if this lat long value leaves this geofence, that's a problem, right? Like it's not something we can write a generic tool for. Exactly. And so we think of those as sort of validation cells in a notebook, if you can imagine that would sort of yell at you or spit out some sort of meaningful output.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's cool. Super interesting. I mean, I definitely see the appeal. I mean, because the difference is like we're doing what probably everyone else is doing, which is like hand coding it every time, including all the boilerplate and the infrastructure and the which is obviously like it's like if you have to do that once or twice, it's okay, but if you got to do that like a dozen times, it's a headache, right? It's
really frustrating. Yeah, and we think the real problem is once you start hand coding tools, you tend to want to innovate in ways that can sometimes be counterproductive, where you're like, oh, cool, and this one's going to be, it's going to have push notifications, and the data model will be high dimensional and like this very useful tool that compiles everything down to a Parquet file, but not an Apache Arrow file. And now we have to like, it's like, okay, oh well, if we sort of focus more on interoperability from the get-go, we might get more use out of this. And so that's part of what we're hoping to bring to the table. But there'll always be trade-offs. I don't think we intend to sort of defeat the hand-rolled solution, because it'll always give you exactly what you want when you want it. But maybe this off-the-shelf thing allows you to get back to doing the work that you really want to do.
Yeah, and not everybody has a team of software engineers to throw at it, who like wants that. So yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah, for sure. Totally. Well, I don't know. I don't want to take up y'all's whole day or whatever. This is a very generous like hand holding introduction here.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we get people dropping in on these calls, and this is kind of the whole point. I think this really concludes what we're trying to achieve here. I mean, everybody else on the call has heard me talk about what we're building because they're actively building it. I will say that this is all going to be open source, this project itself, and so it is the kind of thing that you can sort of deploy and kick tires on the same way as all the other tools that we built. But and so at some point this should be sort of ready for public testing just on the web via like some website, that we control in April. But yeah. In the meantime, we have prototypes being actively built and if you want to see any of this or think you have a use case that we haven't thought of. Be delighted to hear it.
Yeah. No, well, thank you. Well, I have a whole backlog of stuff I need to come try out, I guess. So they'll
Totally.
I'll start there, you know. But yeah, this is cool. I saw your thing about the Discord. Maybe I'll pop. You know, I'm like everybody else. I'm like awash in chat programs and channels and stuff. But maybe I'll pop in there.
I know.
Completely.
We had to pick, and
Yeah.
Slack was just so hostile to managing large public communities.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so
It seems like Discord it seems to maybe be slowly eking out a small like lead in the sort of OSS community, I guess. I mean, I don't know.
maybe, I don't know. It's been tough. I lose so much sleep over those decisions. You know, should we have gone with like Matrix or whatever?
Yeah.
But
I don't know.
it's
I use,
frustrating no matter how you do it.
Yeah, I sometimes go into I mean, obviously I have like Slack for work and whatever, but then there's one called Gitter that is like a Git based thing. And
Mhm.
I use that some because like a lot of the Scala like stuff is in Gitter, but it's
Totally.
honestly not great. Like it's fine, like it works, but it's not the best like experience, you know? So yeah, I don't know. Discord seems good, but anyway, maybe I'll pop in there sometime.
Sounds great. We'd love to have you.
Yeah.
But yeah,
All
thank you for joining this call. This is really appreciated.
All right,
Um,
well, I'm gonna roll.
sounds good.
Is it wrapping up or is there more?
I think that's all we had. Did anybody have anything else? No? All the news that's fit to print. Thank you so much, everybody.
Nice to meet you all. Thanks so much.
All right. Chat soon.
Hey, gang.